Hello everyone, I hope you're all doing well, and it is that time once again to be talking about the London Film Festival. For those of you that don't know or are new to the channel, I have been covering the festival every year on the channel since 2018, and what I like to do is a video talking about every film that I saw at the festival in the order that I saw them in, and give you my brief thoughts on those films. And that is exactly what we're going to do again this year, so without any further ado, this is every film that I saw at the 2023 London Film Festival. So unfortunately things didn't get off to the best of start because the first film I watched was Haar, directed by Ben Hecking, and this one really didn't work for me. On paper it should have, but in execution it didn't. There are things in the film that did work for me. I thought the presentation was rather unique. It's all shot on Super 8 film, and it gives the film this sort of daydreamy quality to it that really works for the themes and the tone that it is going for. The sound design is also pretty unique as well. It's very subtle to begin with, but the more the film goes on, it gets more experimental, and that whole aspect I thought was pretty interesting as well. But that's about it. Everything else about this film just didn't click with me, whether it's the characters or the story. I just couldn't connect to it. I just found myself losing more and more interest as the film went on, which is a shame because the initial setup that the film delivers is quite intriguing, but it just wasn't working for me. After that, I then watched a low-budget sci-fi comedy called Molli and Max in the Future, which markets itself as When Harry Met Sally meets Futurama. And I can kind of see that, but at the same time, not really. Again, this is another film that kind of didn't work for me, but there is more to appreciate with this film and compared to Haar, because considering that this film was done with a very low budget, and you can tell that a lot of it was done on a green screen with a lot of limitations and restrictions, I thought the effects and the CGI that they were using to try and get across a lot of these grand visuals and ideas worked for the most part. There's a certain charm to it because of its low budget nature that actually kind of lends itself to the story of the film. I also quite liked the two lead performances. I thought they had quite a bit of chemistry together, and it is very noticeable when you're watching the movie as well. That being said, the main issue of this film for me was the fact that it's a comedy and I didn't laugh that much. There's like one or two points that I legitimately found funny. Everything else in the film just didn't work for me. A lot of the jokes in the film either fall flat on their face right from the start or just get dragged out for way too long to the point where they lose the humour that they had. And it's pretty much that rinse and repeat throughout the entire film. And it's kind of disappointing because whenever there is a good joke, which is every once in a while throughout this film, it works really well. But then there are other times where it kind of goes down the Rick and Morty route of like doing something that feels a bit improvised and then just really dragging it out until it's not funny anymore. After that, I then watched a coming-of-age drama called Croma Kid from the Dominican Republic. This film actually surprised me quite a bit. This is the first film of the festival that I can legitimately recommend because it's actually pretty decent. It's nothing mind-blowing, but it works for what it is trying to do. I think the coming-of-age element of the film, though it doesn't break any new ground, I think is, again, pretty well done. I think the dynamic between the main kid and his family I thought was well realised. When it needs to be tense and dramatic, it does that, but when it's also quite heartwarming, it does that very well as well. However, where the film really worked for me was when it started to delve into these supernatural, otherworldly elements that I kind of wasn't expecting, and it's not this thing where it just does it for the sake of being a gimmick. It actually lends itself to the 80s aesthetic the film is going for anyway. But on top of that, these supernatural elements, when they're utilised, actually add extra layers to the film, both in terms of the tone it's going for, but also in terms of its story as well. When it did start doing these things, I was like, okay, this is a cool deviation. But then the more it goes on and the more you get to the end, you start to realise, oh, hang on a minute, it's doing this for a thematic and story-driven purpose. And I really appreciated that, because even though I did want it to delve a little bit further into that aspect of the film, I think where it goes is very satisfying, and it leads to a pretty fulfilling conclusion as well. After that, I then watched the documentary Celluloid Underground. Every year at the festival, I like to squeeze in at least one documentary, and this year it was this. The film is from the perspective of the director, who grew up in Iran in the 70s, and there was a revolution in Iran that resulted in a lot of things like film being banned. And as a film lover, he tried to keep that love of cinema alive through underground screenings that kept being shut down by the police. And what I've just said alone is immediately incredibly interesting topic for a documentary. And I think this film knows that. It relishes in telling you its story, and just hearing everything from this person's point of view I thought was genuinely really fascinating, because it's something I didn't know much about, and having seen the film, I'm grateful that I now know about it. I think the way the documentary looks at topics such as censorship, but also just an undying passion for the art form that is cinema, I thought were really well done and would really appeal to anyone who is a fan of film in the first place. Okay, now we're into the heavy hitters, because the next film I saw was The Bikeriders, directed by Jeff Nichols, starring Austin Butler, Tom Hardy, Jodie Comer and Michael Shannon, just to name a few. And I was really excited to see this film, even though I've never seen a Jeff Nichols film up to this point. Some of his previous films like Take Shelter and Midnight Special have really intrigued me in the past, but this one sounded like it was right up my street. It's a based on true story 60s set drama about a bike riding gang, and you've got the entire cast doing a variety of weird accents. Like, what is there not to love? For example, you've got Austin Butler kind of still doing his Elvis-y thing. Like, thankfully it's mostly disappeared in this film, but there's a couple of points where he just dips a little bit back into Elvis. Then you've got Tom Hardy doing what I can best describe as Marlon Brando on helium. If that sounds like your thing, you're going to be in for a treat with this film. Plus you also have Jodie Comer, who, if you actually listen to recordings of the woman she is portraying, she does a spot-on impression of that woman. Like, her voice in this film and the woman's actual real voice is uncanny. Like, the differences are very minute, if that. I just also really digged the vibe of this film as well. It really pushes home the whole 60s thing in the best possible way, to the point where it never feels over-stylized. It still feels particularly grounded, but at the same time, in terms of its direction, Jeff Nichols does feel like he's trying to do his best Scorsese impression, and for the most part it actually kind of works, and it's not too distracting to deteriorate from the enjoyability of the movie. But there are a couple times where it does feel like he is just straight up ripping Scorsese off. Like, there was one point where two people were being executed in a back alley set to like a rock song from the 60s, and I was like, okay, now you're just copying Scorsese, what the hell? With all that being said though, I genuinely did quite like The Bikeriders. It's got a brilliant cast, some great cinematography, has a genuinely interesting story, and it's just really well made. Now, the next film that I watched was not just my most anticipated of the festival, but was my most anticipated for the rest of the year, and that is David Fincher's The Killer. For those of you that maybe don't know, David Fincher is my favourite filmmaker working to date. And I was so ready for this film. Like, as soon as a new Fincher was announced as part of the festival lineup, I was like, I don't care what else is playing, just get me into a screening of The Killer and I will be happy. And it pains me to say that for some reason The Killer didn't work that well for me. I still liked it overall, and it's definitely nowhere near his lower tier stuff like Alien 3, but something just didn't click for me, and I still can't put my finger on it. Like, I saw the film over a week ago now, and I still can't quite figure out why it didn't work. It has all the things you expect from a Fincher film. Like, the film is impeccably shot. I can't complain about it at all in terms of its cinematography. The performances are all great, especially Michael Fassbender, who commits to his performance and really delivers probably the film's strongest aspect. And also the score by Trent Reznor and Atticus Ross is, as you would expect, pretty damn good. But something didn't work for me, and I genuinely don't know what that is. I think part of it might be to do with the story, because it starts off really intriguing. Like, the first few minutes of the film had me gripped, but the further the story went, the more it kind of lost me. It's not to say that the story does anything, out there or bombastic. It's more to say that the story actually plays it a bit too safe for my liking with a Fincher film. And I know this is based off of a graphic novel, so he's sticking to that mostly. But when I watch a Fincher film, most of the time I like to be challenged both emotionally and intellectually a little bit. And this film kind of goes exactly how you're expecting it to go, with like a few minor little twists and turns every now and then. And again, for the most part, it's good. This film is good, don't get me wrong. It's enjoyable, it's fine, but I just wanted more from that, especially from a Fincher film. After that, I then watched Todd Haynes' new film, May December, which was possibly the biggest surprise of the festival for me. This is a film I knew nothing about other than it had Julianne Moore and Natalie Portman in it. And I came away from the film absolutely loving it. I thought this film was going to be a serious drama/thriller about an actress trying to study this woman for a role that she's playing because this woman was in the news several years ago. But the film is actually a comedy, and it works because of that. And I think myself and everyone else in the screening kind of didn't realise it was going to be a comedy until a certain point early on in the film, where it kind of just flat out lets you know, by the way, this is not going to be serious. And once you are on board with that, you can enjoy this film so much more than I think you would be if you went in expecting one thing and were disappointed by getting something else. I thought the whole thing was done with a certain sense of intrigue and drama that again lends itself to whenever the comedic moments come in. And it also manages to perfectly ride a very thin line between being slightly over the top and slightly grounded at the same time. And the fact that it does both of those so well is really impressive. But yeah, I don't really want to say much else, because May December is one of those films where the less you know about it before going into it, the better. Because, like I said, I didn't know much about it myself, and I absolutely loved it coming away from it. Unfortunately, after that, things went downhill a little bit, because the next film I watched was Eileen, starring Thomasin McKenzie and Anne Hathaway. Again, this is a film I knew nothing about going in, and whereas that worked for May December, this actually kind of deteriorated the experience for me, for Eileen. Because, again, without giving away too much, I think the reason why this film didn't work for me, and you'll probably hear a lot of people saying the exact same thing, is that for about 95% of the film's runtime, it is committed to trying to do one specific thing, which on the surface is this lesbian romantic drama in the same vein as Todd Haynes' Carol. And then that extra little 5% at the end, where the final act of the film happens, it then completely throws that out the window to become a thriller in the last 10 minutes. It's the most jarring shift, the sharpest U-turn I've ever seen a film make in my entire life. And I'm still not 100% sure it works. Because, to be honest, with everything else that had happened beforehand in the film, it took me a while to get on board with that on its own. It was about like halfway through the film where I was just starting to get on board with the whole dramatic romance story. And then just as it's starting to win me over, it then pulls the rug out from under me and does that. Just lost me. After that, I then watched the romantic comedy Shortcomings, which is the directorial debut of Randall Park, who most of you will probably know from stuff like WandaVision and Ant-Man and the Wasp. And I don't have much to say about Shortcomings. It's a perfectly fine comedy, and that's kind of it. I genuinely don't have much to say. The performances are great. I think they work for the sake of the film. The story is fun, and the direction is also pretty entertaining as well. And there are some legitimate bits of humour in the film that worked for me. That's kind of all I've got to say about this film. Because outside of that, the rest of the film is just fine. The humour works, the performances work, the direction is strong, and the script is decent. However, after Shortcomings, I then saw the big one. The biggest film at the festival that was a lot of people's most anticipated of the festival and also of the rest of the year. And that is Martin Scorsese's Killers of the Flower Moon. I'm just going to get this straight out of the way immediately. This was my favourite film of the entire festival by a country mile. It delivers everything you want from a Scorsese film. It's directed and edited to such precision that I genuinely can't think of a single scene in the film that could have been cut. And that's saying something considering it's 3.5 hours long. The performances are incredible. This film has some of my favourite performances of the whole year, especially Lily Gladstone, who, if she doesn't get nominated for an Oscar later down the line, I will be very surprised. But even performances from Leonardo DiCaprio, Robert De Niro, or even the likes of Jesse Plemons or Brendan Fraser, who are on screen for not as long as you think, still give incredible performances. There is not a single weak link in this film. You also have just a genuinely fascinating story that, as you see it unfold throughout the film, just gets more and more morally ambiguous and complex. And I just loved seeing how all these pieces were starting to fit into place as the film went on. I could spend hours talking about why Killers of the Flower Moon is so great, but I've got other films to talk about, so all I'm going to say at this point in time is that Killers of the Flower Moon is one of the best films of the year, without a doubt, and it just delivers in every area. So you're probably thinking to yourself, what the hell do you even watch after a 3.5 hour Western directed by Martin Scorsese that is emotionally draining? For me, I chose to watch Late Night with the Devil, which is a horror film set around this lost recording of a 70s talk show that apparently went wrong and was taken over by a demonic presence. That alone sold me, but the thing that drew me in even further was the fact that David Dastmalchian, who you may know from The Dark Knight and The Suicide Squad and Prisoners, is the lead actor in the film. And I've loved David Dastmalchian in everything I've seen him in, but have always been wanting to see him in a lead role, because everything I have seen him in, he's been supporting, and he is great in those performances. But I can see the potential in his acting, and I've always wanted to see him take on a leading role, and the fact that Late Night with the Devil allows him to do that had me really intrigued. And I've got to say, coming out of Killers of the Flower Moon, this was a hell of a palate cleanser, because this was not just a really well-made horror film, it was also just a ton of fun, and I think I needed that after how draining Killers was. This is a film that works as well as it does because it commits so hard to the bit that it is trying to do, and it never takes itself that seriously either. And the more the film goes on, the more over the top it gets. And to be honest, it does lead to an ending that you're either going to be on board with or you're not. For me, it worked. But yeah, this is a film that is really entertaining, takes you off guard quite a few times, and is just a fun horror film that is great with a crowd, but I can also see being quite a fun thing to stream on your own around the Halloween time. After that, I then watched Andrew Haig's new film, All of Us Strangers. Again, I didn't know much about this film going into it, other than it's Andrew Haig, who is a director that I quite like, especially from his films like 45 Years. And this film ruined not just me, but I think everyone that was in the screening room on Sunday morning, because there was not a single dry eye in the entire room that day. The film really goes for the emotions at every single opportunity and somehow manages to nail it at every given opportunity as well. The performances in this film are some of my favourites of the entire year. You've only got 4 main performances, being Andrew Scott, Paul Mescal, Jamie Bell and Claire Foy, and all 4 of them are delivering to the highest standard. Andrew Scott gives a lot of vulnerability and relatability to his character of Adam, to the point where it doesn't even feel like he's trying. He is such a brilliant actor in that sense, because I feel like if any other actor was given that role of Adam, they either could have really gone too far with it or not done enough. And Andrew Scott finds just the right level to bring to that character, to the point where you really feel for him, but you also can kind of put yourself in his shoes when you're not even realizing it. And when the film gets to its more emotionally vulnerable moments, you really do feel them, and it will have you just drenched in your own tears. Now, I went into this film expecting it to be your typical kind of call me by your name style gay romantic drama, but the film has another aspect to it that I was genuinely not expecting, that just tackles grief and loss, and that whole aspect of the film is where it just emotionally ruined me. Like, whenever there are these scenes with Andrew Scott, Claire Foy and Jamie Bell together, just ruined me. Every single one of those scenes had me in tears, and there's a point in the film where it does get a little repetitive, where it goes back and forth from the romantic stuff between Andrew Scott and Paul Mescal to the more emotionally dense stuff with Andrew Scott, Jamie Bell and Claire Foy. And for the first half of the film, it just bounces between these two stories as if there's not much connecting them. As the film gets into its third act, though, it weaves these two elements together so perfectly, leading to an ending that has been stuck in my head since seeing the film. Thankfully, though, I was able to kind of cleanse the palate a little bit, considering how emotionally devastating All of Us Strangers was, because the next film I watched, which was my second most anticipated of the festival, was Hayao Miyazaki's The Boy and The Heron. Now, I have a confession to make. I have never seen a Studio Ghibli film on the big screen before, so this was a first for me. And seeing Miyazaki's unbridled creativity burst to the screen was such a joy to watch. And yeah, I mean, I don't have much to say about this film, because it's Miyazaki doing what he does best, and it's just everything you expect from one of his films. If you're a fan of Howl's Moving Castle or Spirited Away or My Neighbor Totoro, then you're in for a treat with this film, because visually it's as gorgeous as any other Studio Ghibli film. The animation is jaw-droppingly stunning in every single point of this movie. The story, though it does feel a bit jumbled in places, overall works, and the fact that it sticks the landing at the end, I have to commend it for, because there was a point where it was feeling like it was trying to juggle a lot of stuff all at once, and I wasn't sure how it was going to wrap everything up. But the film manages to do so in a way that feels somewhat cathartic, and again, it just works. I definitely think if this is his final film, which is debatable at the moment, this is one hell of a final note to go on. And the best way I can describe The Boy and the Heron is this feels like a culmination of everything you've come to expect from Miyazaki, just delivered in one singular film. And even though that can be a bit much at times throughout the runtime of the movie, it mostly delivers. So, the second to last film that I watched was the surprise film. For those of you that don't know, every year at the London Film Festival they put on a surprise film. This is a film where no one knows what it is until literally seconds before they start it. And it leads to endless speculation all month about what it could possibly be. In the past, it's been films like Lady Bird, Birdman, No Country for Old Men. Last year it was The Menu. And this year it was Michael Mann's biopic, Ferrari, starring Adam Driver, Penelope Cruz, Shailene Woodley and Patrick Dempsey. I didn't have that much excitement for Ferrari. Like, it's one of those films where, like, okay, it comes out, if I catch it on TV at some point, I'll probably give it a watch. But the fact that it was the surprise film, I was like, okay, sure, I'm on board with this. This was my first time doing the surprise film, so I was just ready for whatever was about to come. And to be honest, considering you have a cast like that, and it's Michael Mann at the helm, what could possibly go wrong? I can give you an answer. A lot of things. Because Ferrari is the worst film I saw at the festival. I'm not going to sugarcoat anything. It's just not good. It's just very messy. The only positives I can physically take from the film is that Penelope Cruz gives the best performance in the film, and that it's shot pretty well. Everything else about the movie is very messy and very choppy. I did not feel a single thing for anything that was happening on screen. Adam Driver gives a fine performance as Enzo Ferrari, but it's nothing that's going to reinvent the wheel. Shailene Woodley is, again, fine, but she bounces between so many bloody accents that it's quite laughable at points. Like, there is one scene where it cuts to her, she is speaking in an Italian accent. It cuts to Adam Driver, it then cuts back to her, and she's back in her American accent. The score by Daniel Pemberton, I'm afraid to say, is not great. I love Daniel Pemberton as a composer. I think he's made some brilliant scores in the past. This is not one of them. It's very in-your-face and loud and bombastic, and is used at completely the wrong times in the film. Yeah, Ferrari's not good, and it pains me to say that because I like Michael Mann as a director, and I like the majority of the cast here, but it's just not good. Thankfully, though, I ended things on a high note with Bradley Cooper's newest film, Maestro. He's not just directed this, but he's also starring in it as Leonard Bernstein, and we also have Carey Mulligan in this film as well. Considering I wasn't expecting much from this film, I came away genuinely really impressed. And this is one of those few films from the festival that is just getting better and better the more I let it sit with me. Because after watching it, it's a very in-your-face movie that it can be a bit much to take on board. But now that I've had almost a week to let it sit, I genuinely really like this film. There are some points that don't work as well as they should, and there are other points where it is trying a bit too hard to do a certain thing. But at the end of the day, I just kind of didn't care, because Bradley Cooper, both in terms of his direction and his performance, is just going all in on this movie and is just so committed to what it is trying to do that I just can't be mad at it. I'm just more impressed than anything else, because in terms of his direction, he pulls out all the stops, going from black and white to colour, and throwing in these dance numbers and some genuinely impressive scenes in terms of staging that I was just more impressed than anything else. And then you have the performances, which are also brilliant across the board. Plus there is this one scene set in a church where Bradley Cooper is conducting this orchestra and choir with such ferocity and genuine passion, and that whole scene just left me speechless. I was floored by that entire moment in the film. I really liked Maestro a lot more than I thought I was going to, and it's one that I can see myself not just revisiting in the future, but also just thinking about more and more as time goes on. So guys, that is everything I watched at the London Film Festival this year. Please let me know in the comments which of these films you're looking forward to seeing when they're released more widely, or if you were at the festival, please let me know in the comments what film was your favourite of the whole festival as well. If you liked the video, then give it a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already. Bye.